The sun hadn't even risen when Julia Evans finished zipping up the last suitcase. Her tired eyes alternated between the wall clock and the crib where Luke slept peacefully, oblivious to the drastic changes that were about to happen in his little 8-month-old life. Miami, the city that had always been her home, would be just a memory in a few hours. "We're doing the right thing, my love," Julia whispered, gently stroking her son's curly hair. The small apartment where they lived was almost empty. The few things worth keeping had been sold or donated. The rest would be left behind, just like the memories of her failed marriage to Roderick. At 27, Julia was starting over from scratch. A qualified teacher, she had secured a transfer to a school in New York City. The salary wasn't much better, but the distance from Miami, and especially from Roderick and his controlling family, was worth every penny less. The taxi arrived promptly at 5 in the morning. The driver, a friendly older gentleman, helped with the bags while Julia settled Luke into his car seat. During the ride to the airport, she tried not to look out the window at the familiar places that passed by like flashes. She needed to move forward. At Miami International Airport, Julia faced the first difficulty of the day, balancing Luke, her purse, and 2 suitcases while checking in. An airline employee, noticing her struggle, approached, offering assistance. "First trip with the little one?" she asked gently. "Yes," Julia replied, trying to control her nervousness. "I hope he behaves well during the flight." "Don't worry, dear. Babies that age usually sleep with the engine noise. I'll make sure you both are comfortable." After check-in, Julia headed to the departure lounge. While waiting, Luke woke up, looking curiously at the unfamiliar environment. She took one of the few toys she had brought from her bag and handed it to her son. "We'll be on the plane soon, son. It will be a great adventure," she said, trying to convince herself more than the baby. Boarding began promptly. When it was her turn, Julia adjusted Luke in the sling she was wearing and walked down the narrow aisle of the plane, looking for her seat. 14C, a middle-row seat. As she approached, she noticed that the window seat was already occupied by a man typing quickly on a state-of-the-art laptop. He wore an impeccable suit, had neatly cut hair, and seemed completely absorbed in his work. "Excuse me," she murmured, trying to get the man's attention. He lifted his eyes from the computer and Julia felt a slight jolt as she met an intense gaze. Without saying anything, he stood up to let her pass, closing his laptop in a swift motion. "Thank you," she said, settling into her seat and positioning Luke on her lap. The man merely nodded and sat back down, but Julia noticed him casting discreet glances towards Luke, who was now observing the stranger with childish curiosity. Julia felt a tightening in her chest. Plane trips already made her anxious in normal situations, and now with Luke the worry multiplied. What if the baby cried throughout the flight? What if the passengers, especially that important-looking man next to her, got annoyed? The possibilities of embarrassment were endless. As the plane began to taxi, Luke let out a small whimper. Julia immediately began to sway him, humming a lullaby softly. To her relief, the baby calmed down, looking fascinated by the plane windows. After takeoff, when the seatbelt sign turned off, she searched her bag for a bottle she had prepared. As she tried to open the insulated bag, she ended up dropping a few items, including her cell phone. The man next to her leaned over and picked up the device before it slid under the seat in front. "Here," he said, extending the phone with a faint smile on his lips. "Thank you," Julia replied, feeling her cheeks flush slightly. "Sorry for the trouble." "No trouble at all," he responded, his voice softer than she expected. He looked at Luke, who was now staring at him with curious eyes. "How old is he?" 8 months, Julia answered, surprised by his interest. "He's a smart boy," he commented, offering his index finger to Luke, who immediately grabbed it with his tiny hand. "Look at that grip." The unexpectedly gentle gesture broke some of the tension Julia was feeling. Perhaps the trip wouldn't be as terrible as she imagined. A flight attendant approached, offering drinks. Noticing the man next to Julia, her demeanor subtly changed. "Mr. Montgomery, what a surprise to have you with us today. Can I offer you something special, sir? We have that wine you enjoy." The man, Mr. Montgomery, apparently, shook his head. "Just water, please. I have a meeting as soon as we land in New York City." "Certainly, sir." The flight attendant then looked at Julia and Luke. "And for you and the baby." "Water too, thank you," Julia replied, feeling suddenly out of place. When the flight attendant moved away, another passenger, an elegantly dressed woman, approached down the aisle and stopped beside them. "Raphael Montgomery, what a wonderful coincidence," the woman exclaimed with an overly friendly smile. "I'm Patricia Vance, from Vance Enterprises. We met at the agribusiness event in Houston last year." The man, Raphael, maintained a polite smile, but Julia noticed a slight tension in his posture. "Of course, Ms. Vance. How are you?" "Excellent. I'm returning from a business trip to Miami. What a coincidence to find you here. You know, we're expanding into the natural fertilizer sector, and I'd love to discuss potential partnerships." As the woman spoke non-stop, Julia noticed Raphael's growing discomfort. He responded politely, but his eyes occasionally darted to Julia and Luke, as if seeking an escape. Luke, perhaps sensing the tension, began to get restless. Julia tried to calm him discreetly, fearing he would start crying and cause more discomfort. After several minutes of unilateral conversation, the woman finally said, "Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time now. Can I stop by your office next week to continue this conversation? My secretary manages my schedule. Please contact her," Raphael replied politely but firmly. When the woman finally moved away, Raphael let out a discreet sigh. He looked at Julia, who was still trying to calm Luke, and then, surprisingly, leaned towards her. "Sorry to ask this," he whispered, "but could you do me a favor?" Julia looked at him with surprise and a hint of suspicion. "Could you pretend to be asleep on my shoulder for a few minutes?" he continued, his voice low and almost embarrassed. "It will discourage more interruptions like that. I promise it's nothing inappropriate. It's just that this kind of approach happens all the time and I'm really tired today." Julia blinked, astonished by the unusual request. For a moment she considered refusing. After all, she barely knew this man. But something in his gaze, a mixture of weariness and sincerity, made her hesitate. "Please," he insisted gently, "just until that woman stops looking this way. She's probably waiting for an opportunity to come back." Julia looked discreetly, and indeed, the said Patricia Vance was observing them from her seat a few rows ahead. With a sigh of resignation, Julia nodded. "All right, but only for a few minutes." "Thank you," Raphael said with a relieved smile. Adjusting Luke comfortably on her lap, Julia leaned slightly, resting her head on Raphael's shoulder. The proximity initially made her tense, but the accumulated fatigue of the past few days, the anxiety of the move, and the comforting warmth emanating from him gradually relaxed her. What started as an act slowly transformed into reality. Julia's eyes grew heavy, her eyelids lowered, and before she knew it, her body succumbed to exhaustion. The last conscious thought she had was that his scent was surprisingly pleasant, not ostentatious as she would imagine from a rich man, but subtle and comforting, like something familiar she couldn't quite identify. Raphael Montgomery was accustomed to being recognized. As CEO of Montgomery Agritech Industries, one of the largest agribusiness companies in the United States, his face frequently appeared in business magazines and industry events. What he wasn't accustomed to was feeling that strange sense of protection that enveloped him when he realized the young woman beside him had actually fallen asleep. He hadn't planned this. He just wanted some peace during the flight, away from people who constantly tried to approach him out of self-interest. But now, with her head resting on his shoulder and the small baby sleeping peacefully in her lap, something inside him stirred. He tried to go back to working on his laptop, but he couldn't concentrate. His thoughts drifted to the last 15 years, ever since he took over the family business after the accident that took his parents. He was only 20 at the time, studying architecture, his true passion, and suddenly found himself responsible not only for an economic empire but also for his younger sister, Caroline, who was just 12. Responsibility transformed him. From a young man full of dreams and creative projects, he became a calculating and pragmatic businessman. The empire grew under his command, but each professional achievement seemed to come with a personal loss. Genuine friendships disappeared, replaced by relationships of interest. Romantic relationships became a game of strategy, where he always wondered if the interest was in him or his wealth. He looked again at the sleeping young woman. There was something different about her. The exhaustion etched on her face was genuine, not a manufactured vulnerability to elicit protection, something he had seen many times. Her simple but neat clothes, the way she tried not to bother, The apprehensive look when the baby became restless. Everything indicated a real person, struggling with real problems. A slight turbulence shook the plane, causing the baby to stir. Raphael instinctively reached out, steadying the little one so he wouldn't slip from his mother's lap. The boy opened his eyes for a moment, looked at him without apprehension and fell back asleep. That simple gesture of unconscious trust touched Raphael in a way he hadn't expected. The turbulence increased slightly, shaking the aircraft enough to wake Julia. She opened her eyes, confused, taking a few seconds to process where she was and on whom she was leaning. When full consciousness returned, she straightened up with a start, her cheeks tinged red. I'm sorry," she stammered, adjusting Luke, who continued to sleep. "I didn't intend to actually fall asleep." Raphael smiled, a genuine smile he rarely displayed in public. "There's nothing to apologize for. You seem to really need that rest." Julia ran a hand through her hair, trying to tidy it. "How long did I sleep?" "About an hour," he replied, consulting his discreetly luxurious wristwatch. "How your son didn't even stir. He's a calm boy." "Luke usually is, but you never know in new situations like this. It's our first plane trip together." "Are you moving to New York City?" Raphael asked, genuinely interested. Julia hesitated for a moment, as if evaluating how much she could reveal to a stranger. "Yes," she finally replied. "I got a transfer to a school there. I'm an early childhood education teacher." "New York City is a challenging city, but full of opportunities," he commented. "I travel constantly between there and various regions of the country for work." "In agribusiness, right? I heard that lady mention something about it." Raphael nodded, surprised she hadn't made the full connection to who he was. "Yes, I manage several properties and companies in the sector. My job requires me to be constantly moving between offices and farms." "That must be interesting," Julia commented. "My grandfather had a small farm in rural Florida. Nothing grand, just a few mango trees, banana trees, and a small vegetable patch. I spent many summers there as a child." Her face lit up as she spoke of her grandfather, and Raphael noticed how much younger and lighter she seemed when she smiled like that. "Those were the best times of my childhood," she continued. "Waking up to the birds singing, eating freshly picked fruit, helping in the garden. My grandfather always said that the earth teaches us more than any book." "Your grandfather was a wise man," Raphael commented sincerely. "Amidst so many reports, meetings, and negotiations, sometimes I forget that simpler, more direct connection to the land." As they talked, Luke woke up, rubbing his eyes and looking curiously around. Noticing Raphael, he broke into a toothless grin and stretched his little hand towards him. "May I?" he asked Julia, indicating if he could hold the baby. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded, carefully passing Luke into his arms. Raphael settled him with a skill that surprised Julia. "I have practice with my niece," he explained, noticing her gaze. "Caroline, my sister, has a 3-year-old daughter, Marianne. I'm the doting uncle." Seeing that powerful man holding her son with such care, Julia felt something disarming within her. For months, since the end of her marriage, she had built walls around herself, distrusting the intentions of any man who approached. But there was something about Raphael, perhaps the vulnerability hidden beneath the facade of success, that seemed authentic. "It must be difficult," she commented after a moment. "What? Never knowing if people approach you, or for what you represent." Raphael looked at her with surprise, impressed by her perception. "That's exactly it," he agreed. "Over time, you develop a radar for hidden interests, but that also means living constantly suspicious. It's tiring." "I imagine so," Julia said, watching Luke comfortably play with Raphael's silk tie. "We all have our struggles, don't we? Different kinds of prisons." The comment hung between them, creating a moment of silent connection that was interrupted by the captain's announcement that they were beginning their descent into John F. Kennedy International Airport. "We're almost there," Julia said, a note of anxiety returning to her voice. The reality of the new life awaiting her again weighed on her shoulders. Raphael handed Luke back to her arms, their fingers brushing lightly in the process. "Do you have somewhere to stay in New York City? Someone waiting for you?" "My second cousin. Well, actually, she's my mother's cousin, but we've always been close. I'm staying with her until I find a place to rent." Raphael nodded, seeming to want to say something more, but holding back. As the plane descended, both remained silent, each absorbed in their own thoughts. When they finally landed, the disembarkation ritual began. Julia gathered her things, put Luke in the sling, and prepared to face the new phase of her life. Raphael stood up first, grabbing his executive briefcase. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Julia," he said, extending his hand. "And you too, Luke." As she shook his hand, Raphael added, "New York City can be intimidating at first, but give the city a chance. It has its own kind of magic hidden beneath the concrete." Julia smiled, nodding her thanks as he moved away down the aisle. Watching him walk away, she felt a pang of melancholy. That brief encounter had been a strange parenthesis of calm before the storm that would be her new beginning. For a few hours, she had forgotten her problems and allowed herself to simply exist. Sighing, she adjusted Luke in the sling and prepared to disembark. It was time to face reality. The JFK airport terminal buzzed with activity. Julia held Luke firmly against her chest as she walked through the crowd, dragging her rolling suitcase and trying to orient herself in that intimidating space. After collecting her second suitcase from the carousel, she headed to the arrivals area, where Chloe, her second cousin, had promised to wait for her. Minutes passed and there was no sign of Chloe. Julia checked her phone several times, but there were no new messages. She tried to call, but the call went straight to voicemail. Anxiety began to grow in her chest. Luke, sensing his mother's tension, began to get restless. After almost an hour of waiting, her phone finally rang. It was Chloe, her voice hurried and laden with guilt. "Julia, forgive me. My daughter had an asthma attack and I had to rush her to the hospital. We've been in the A&E for hours. There was no way to warn you earlier because my phone died. Can you take a taxi here? I promise I'll reimburse you later." Julia's heart sank. It wasn't Chloe's fault, of course, but this complicated everything. Her resources were extremely limited, and the cost of a taxi from the airport to East London, where Chloe lived, was not in her tight budget. "Of course, don't worry," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "The important thing is that your daughter gets well. We'll see each other later." As she hung up, Julia sat on a nearby bench, trying to reorganize her thoughts. She could try public transport, but navigating London's complex underground and bus system with a baby and 2 suitcases seemed like a Herculean task for her first day in the city. Luke started to cry, probably tired and confused by the noisy environment. Julia tried to calm him, rocking him gently, but her own tears threatened to fall. At that moment, the magnitude of her decision hit her with full force. She was alone with a baby in an unknown city, practically penniless and without immediate support. "Julia?" She looked up and saw Raphael standing in front of her. He had exchanged his suit jacket for a more casual blazer and seemed about to leave the airport. His expression changed from surprise to concern as he saw her and Luke's state. "Is everything all right?" "Yes. No. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "My cousin was supposed to pick me up, but there was an emergency with her daughter. I'm trying to figure out the best way to get to her house." Raphael looked at the 2 suitcases, at crying Luke, and at Julia's visibly distressed face. Without hesitation, he took out his phone and made a quick call. "Albert? Yes, I need to cancel the 11 o'clock meeting. Reschedule it for tomorrow, please. Tell the Thames Valley Cooperative executives that a family emergency has come up." After a pause, he continued, "I also need you to contact Roger. Ask him to bring the car to the main entrance of Terminal 2. Yes, immediately." As he hung up, he turned to Julia with a determined expression. "I'm not going to let you and Luke face public transport with all these suitcases on your first day in London." "You don't need to bother," Julia protested, although part of her was deeply relieved by the offer. "I'm sure I can manage." "I know you can," Raphael replied with a slight smile, "but there's no reason to make things harder than they already are. My driver can take you to your cousin's house." "But your meeting, it can wait until tomorrow. The Thames Valley Cooperative isn't going anywhere." He made a dismissive gesture with his hand, as if cancelling professional commitments was a routine matter. "Besides, I owe you. Thanks to you sleeping on my shoulder, I got an hour of peace on that flight." The comment brought a smile to Julia's face, despite the circumstances. "Are you sure? I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." "Absolutely. Come on, let's wait for Roger outside. The fresh air will be good for Luke too." Without waiting for an answer, Raphael picked up Julia's 2 suitcases and started walking towards the exit. She followed him, adjusting Luke in the sling, who was already beginning to calm down with the movement. Upon reaching the main entrance of the terminal, Raphael led her to a less crowded area. The contrast between the airport's hustle and bustle and the relative calm of that space made Luke finally stop crying, although he still sobbed occasionally. "Which neighborhood does your cousin live in?" Raphael asked. "In Leighton. It's in East London, quite far from here." Raphael nodded without showing any discomfort with the distance. "Do you have the exact address?" Julia searched her phone for the message where Chloe had sent the full address and showed it to Raphael, who typed the information into his own device. "Done. I've sent it to Roger. He should be arriving any minute." While they waited, a comfortable silence settled between them. Julia watched the movement of cars and people, trying to absorb the frantic energy of the metropolis. Luke, now calmer, observed everything with curious eyes. "He adapts quickly," Raphael commented, noticing how the baby already seemed more at ease. "Yes, Luke has always been like that. Sometimes I think he has more courage than I do." She kissed the top of her son's head. "I think I'll need to learn from him in the coming days." "New beginnings require courage," Raphael said, his gaze distant for a moment. "But they also bring possibilities we don't see when we're stuck in the familiar." There was something in the way he spoke that made Julia think he wasn't just trying to comfort her, but also reflecting on his own life. A black luxury sedan smoothly parked in front of them. A middle-aged man, wearing a discreet uniform, got out of the car and approached. "Good morning, Mr. Davies," he greeted respectfully. "Roger, this is Ms. Julia Alves and her son Luke. Please take them to this address." Raphael showed the phone with the address to the driver. "Certainly, sir." Roger turned to Julia with a kind smile. "I'll put your suitcases in the boot, madam." While the driver was stowing the luggage, Julia noticed something surprising when Roger opened the rear door of the vehicle. "Is that a baby seat?" she asked, confused. Raphael seemed slightly embarrassed. "Ah, yes. I require all company cars to have one. We are developing a social project to install nurseries on our farms for employees' children. It's part of a broader social responsibility initiative." Julia looked at him with a new perspective. Did the ruthless agribusiness entrepreneur also care about the well-being of his employees' children? "That's admirable," she commented sincerely. "It's the least we can do." He looked away as if uncomfortable with the compliment. "Working mothers face challenges that we men often don't even realize." The observation touched Julia deeply. It was rare to find men, especially in positions of power, who acknowledged the specific difficulties faced by working mothers. Roger finished stowing the suitcases and opened the door for Julia. She hesitated for a moment before getting into the car, turning to Raphael. "I don't know how to thank you for all this." "There's no need," he replied with a soft smile. "Just send me a message when you arrive safely." "But I don't have your number," she said, realizing the detail. Raphael took out his phone, unlocked it, and handed it to her. "You can add your contact here. It's just so I know you arrived safely," he explained quickly, as if he feared she might misinterpret the gesture. Julia typed her number and returned the device. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt a strange tingle from the contact. "Thank you again, Raphael, for everything." He nodded, closing the door after she and Luke were settled. Through the car window, their gazes met one last time before Roger started the engine. As the car pulled away from the airport, entering London's intense traffic, Julia looked out the window, observing the vastness of buildings that stood like concrete sentinels. Luke, comfortably installed in his car seat, babbled happily, fascinated by the car's movement. "Are you a friend of Mr. Davies?" Roger asked, looking at her through the rearview mirror. "Not exactly," Julia replied, not knowing how to define that strange connection formed in just a few hours. "We met on the plane, by coincidence." Roger smiled, a smile that suggested he was accustomed to his boss's unpredictable gestures. "Mr. Davies may seem reserved at first glance, but he has a generous heart. I've worked with him for 12 years, ever since he took over the family business. You must know him well then. Well enough to know that he rarely cancels meetings, especially with the Thames Valley Cooperative. They are important partners." The comment made Julia suddenly feel guilty. "Oh, I didn't know it was that important. Now I feel bad for having accepted the help." "Don't worry, madam. If he cancelled, it's because he wanted to. Mr. Davies always makes his own decisions." As the car drove through the congested avenues, Julia felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from an unknown number. "I hope your journey is going smoothly. I remembered you mentioned looking for an apartment to rent. I have some contacts in the real estate market who might be able to help. Just let me know if you need anything. Raphael. Julia reread the message several times, surprised by the continuous consideration. At the end of one of the most stressful days of her life, finding such kindness from a stranger seemed almost surreal. Your son is very calm, Roger commented, interrupting her thoughts. He usually is, but today has been a busy day for both of us. I'm surprised he's not exhausted. Children are like that, resilient. My 3 children are proof of it. When they were little, they adapted to any situation with an ease that we adults lose over time. The conversation with Roger helped pass the time during the long journey. The driver knew the city well and shared valuable tips about public transport, safe neighborhoods, and even good, affordable schools. Information Julia eagerly absorbed. When they finally arrived at Chloe's address, it was already past noon. The street was quiet, typical of a middle-class residential neighborhood. Roger parked in front of the small yellow semi-detached house, got out of the car, and began to remove the suitcases from the boot. Julia checked her phone one more time and saw that Chloe had sent a message. We're home now. Anne is better. Sorry again for the inconvenience. It looks like they're already home, Julia commented, relieved. Great, Roger replied, placing the suitcases on the pavement. Would you like me to wait until someone answers? No need, thank you. You've already done more than enough. Roger nodded, handing her a card. This is my personal contact. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call. London can be intimidating at first, but I promise it gets better with time. Julia thanked him, touched by his kindness. After Roger left, she took out her phone and typed a reply to Raphael. We arrived safely. I don't know how to thank you for all your help today. As for the real estate contacts, that would be wonderful. I'm completely lost in that regard. She sent the message and, after a brief moment of hesitation, added, P.S. Your driver is an amazing person. You have good taste in choosing who to work with. On the other side of the city, sitting in his penthouse office on Canary Wharf, Raphael smiled as he read the message. The cancelled meeting had resulted in a pile of documents demanding his immediate attention, but he couldn't concentrate. His thoughts kept returning to the young teacher and her baby. There was something about her, an authenticity, a quiet strength, that intrigued him. In a world where every interaction seemed calculated, that casual encounter had been a reminder that genuine connections still existed. Albert, he called his assistant over the intercom. Please contact Helen Campbell from Horizon Realty. Tell her I need a list of available apartments for rent in safe neighborhoods close to schools with a fair market value. It's for a teacher with a baby new to the city. Immediately, sir, Albert replied, showing no surprise at the unusual request. After years of working with Raphael, he was used to his occasional unexpected actions. Raphael leaned back in his chair, spinning it to contemplate the panoramic view of London. The city stretched infinitely in all directions, an ocean of concrete and glass. Somewhere in that immensity, a young mother and her son were beginning a new journey. What are you doing, Raphael? He murmured to himself. You barely know this woman. But the questioning didn't diminish the feeling that something important had happened on that plane. Something that, for the first time in a long time, made him feel simply human. 3 days had passed since Julia's arrival in London. Chloe's house, though welcoming, was too small to comfortably accommodate 2 more residents. Anne, Chloe's 12-year-old daughter, already gave up her room for visitors, sleeping on a mattress in the living room, a situation Julia knew couldn't last. The apartment hunt was proving more challenging than she had imagined. Rental values were absurdly high, even for small, poorly maintained properties. And when she did find something minimally within her budget, she discovered that the location was in dangerous areas, or so distant that the commute time to the school where she would teach would be impractical. That morning, she was returning from another frustrating session of property viewings. Luke, in his buggy, played with a makeshift rattle that Chloe had made for him. The baby seemed immune to his mother's discouragement, smiling at strangers on the bus and observing the city with curious eyes. At least one of us is adapting well, Julia murmured, stroking her son's curly hair. Upon arriving at Chloe's house, they found her cousin preparing lunch in the small kitchen. So? Chloe asked hopefully. Did you find anything? Julia shook her head negatively, taking Luke out of the buggy. The first was a cramped cubicle with no ventilation and mold on the walls. The second was 2 hours from the school, not counting traffic. And the third, she sighed deeply. The third even seemed promising, until I realized that the quiet neighborhood the agent praised so much was due to the fact that we were practically inside a cemetery. Chloe laughed, despite the situation. London doesn't make it easy for newcomers. But don't get discouraged, something will turn up. I hope so, and quickly. I don't want to keep imposing on your hospitality. Don't be silly. You and Luke are welcome for as long as you need. Julia's phone vibrated. It was a message from Raphael, the third since she arrived in the city. The first two had been brief, asking how they were adapting. She had replied politely, without prolonging the conversation, although each message from him caused a strange chill in her stomach that she preferred not to analyze. How is the apartment hunt going? I've got some contacts that might help. Let me know if you need them. Julia hesitated. Until then, she had avoided accepting more help from Raphael, determined to solve her problems alone. But the realities of London were proving tougher than she had imagined, and with Luke, she couldn't afford the luxury of unnecessary pride. To be honest, it's not going well, she replied. The places within my budget are unsuitable for a child, and the decent ones are out of my reach. The reply came almost instantly. Can I ask a trusted real estate agent to contact you? She knows landlords who prefer to rent to reliable people at fair prices, rather than speculating with inflated values. Once again, Julia hesitated. The offer was tempting, but it also generated distrust. Why was a man she barely knew so persistently helpful? Why are you helping me so much? She typed, and sent it before she changed her mind. There was a pause before the reply. Because I can, because I know how hard it is to start over in a city like London, and because Luke reminds me that there are more important things in life than contracts and meetings. The sincerity of the reply surprised her. There was no subtext she could detect, no insinuation, just genuine goodwill. Still, she hesitated once more before typing, All right, I appreciate the help with the real estate contacts. She had barely sent the message when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello. Good afternoon. Am I speaking with Julia Alves? A professional female voice sounded from the other end. Yes, this is she. This is Helen Campbell from Horizon Realty. Mr. Davies asked me to contact you about rental options. Julia looked at her phone, astonished. That was fast. Helen laughed lightly. Mr. Davies is not known for wasting time. I have a few options that might interest you. We can meet later today if you prefer. Today? Julia couldn't hide her surprise. Yes, of course, that would be great. They arranged a time for early afternoon. As she hung up, Julia noticed Chloe observing her with curiosity. Who is this Mr. Davies who is moving mountains for you? Her cousin asked, raising an eyebrow suggestively. Just an acquaintance who was kind enough to help me, Julia replied, feeling her cheeks inexplicably flush. We met on the plane. An acquaintance who provides a driver, a real estate agent, and seems very interested in your well-being. Interesting. It's nothing like what you're thinking, Julia protested. He's just kind. Chloe shrugged, a mischievous smile on her lips. If you say so. Anyway, I'll stay with Luke while you visit the apartments. It will be easier without a baby. At 2 in the afternoon, Julia met Helen Campbell at a cafe near Angel Station. The agent, an elegant and efficient middle-aged woman, was already waiting for her with a folder of documents. Julia, nice to meet you. I've prepared some options based on the information Mr. Davies provided, proximity to schools, neighborhood safety, and of course a value within the reality of a teacher starting her career in London. Over the next 3 hours, they visited 5 apartments, all substantially better than any option Julia had found on her own. The last one, a 2-bedroom apartment in Islington, was practically perfect. Bright, airy, in a safe building, only 2 blocks from the school where she would work, and, miraculously, within her budget. This is ideal, Julia said, marveling as she walked through the empty rooms, already imagining where she would put the furniture she still needed to buy. But honestly, I'm suspicious. How can a place like this be within my budget? Helen smiled understandingly. The landlord is a long-standing client of our agency. He prefers reliable tenants over leaving the property empty for months, waiting for inflated values. Besides, she hesitated briefly. Mr. Davies personally vouched for your character, and that counts for a lot in the London real estate market. Julia felt a mix of gratitude and discomfort. On one hand, she was relieved to find a perfect place to raise Luke. On the other, Raphael's influence over her life was growing more than she felt comfortable accepting. "Can I be frank with you, Helen? Are these values real, or is there some subsidy happening behind the scenes?" The agent seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "The figures are absolutely real. Mr. Mendelssohn was very clear about that. He said specifically, 'I don't want financial favors, just open doors, so she can have fair access to the market.' And that's exactly what I did." Something in the reply made Julia relax a little. It was exactly the kind of thing she imagined Raphael saying. Not offering charity, but using his position to slightly level a playing field that would otherwise be completely tilted against her. "In that case, I'd like to take this apartment." "Excellent choice," Helen smiled. "We can sign the contract tomorrow if you prefer. The property is available for immediate move-in." Upon returning to Chloe's house, Julia was brimming with enthusiasm. She told her cousin about the perfect apartment, omitting the details about Raphael's influence in the process. "It seems we've finally had a bit of luck," she commented, picking Luke up. The baby smiled in recognition, stretching his little arms towards her. "What do you think, son? We're going to have our own little place?" That night, after finally getting Luke to sleep, Julia picked up her phone and typed a message to Raphael. "I visited some apartments today with Helen. We found a perfect place in Richmond. I'll sign the contract tomorrow. I can't thank you enough." She sent it, and after a moment's hesitation added another message. "I'd like to return your kindness somehow. Perhaps coffee once we're settled?" The reply came minutes later. "Great news. Helen is excellent at what she does. And as for coffee, how about dinner? I know a place in Richmond that comfortably accommodates small children. Perhaps next weekend after you've moved. I can also suggest some furniture stores with good prices if you need them." Julia felt a strange thrill reading the invitation. It wasn't a date, she told herself, just a thank you to someone who had helped when she needed it most. "Dinner would be great," she replied. "And yes, any tips on furniture would be very welcome. For now, I only have a mattress for myself, a travel cot for Luke, and our clothes." "It's a plan, then. And don't worry about the furniture. Starting from scratch also means being able to choose every piece that enters your new life." The reply made her smile. Somehow, Raphael always seemed to find the right words to turn challenges into possibilities. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Julia signed the rental contract, received the keys, and, with the help of Chloe and her husband Charles, began moving into the new apartment. The school where she would work was only starting the academic year in 2 weeks, giving her time to organize the new house and help Luke adjust to the new routine. On Saturday night, the eve of the dinner arranged with Raphael, Julia was in the still practically empty apartment, finishing assembling Luke's travel cot, when the doorbell rang. She found it strange, as she wasn't expecting anyone at that hour. Chloe and Charles had left earlier, after helping to transport the mattress and some boxes of basic utensils. Perhaps they had forgotten something. When she opened the door, she was momentarily speechless. Raphael stood in the hallway wearing jeans and a casual shirt, quite different from the suit-clad executive she had met on the plane. Beside him was a young man in a delivery uniform. "Hi," he said with a shy smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Raphael, wasn't dinner tomorrow?" "It still is," he replied. "I'm here for another reason. May I come in?" Still surprised, Julia stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The delivery man remained at the door. Raphael looked around the almost empty apartment, noting the mattress on the floor of the main bedroom, visible through the open door, and the partially assembled cot in the living room. "I brought something for you," he said, turning to the delivery man and making an affirmative gesture. The young man entered, carrying a large cardboard box, and carefully placed it in the middle of the empty living room. "Where should I put the rest, sir?" the delivery man asked. "The rest?" Julia repeated, confused. "It's just a few basic items," Raphael explained quickly, looking almost embarrassed. "Nothing extravagant, I promise. Just enough so you and Luke don't have to sleep on the floor while you organize the apartment." Before Julia could fully process what was happening, 2 more delivery men entered, carrying more boxes and wrapped packages. "Raphael, I can't accept this," she protested, feeling simultaneously embarrassed and touched. "It's too much." "Please," he said softly, approaching so only she could hear. "It's not charity, I swear. It's just, I went through something similar when I had to suddenly take over the family business. I know what it's like to start over in an empty place." Something in the sincerity of his gaze made Julia hesitate. It wasn't pity she saw in his eyes, but genuine understanding, as if he were truly reliving his own experience through hers. Luke, who was playing on his activity mat in the corner of the room, began to babble excitedly as he noticed Raphael. He stretched out his little arms, as if asking to be held. "Looks like someone remembers me," Raphael smiled, looking at Julia as if asking for permission. She nodded, and he approached the baby, bending down to his height. Luke immediately grabbed his shirt, giggling. "Hi, champ, I see you're enjoying the new house." That scene, Raphael crouching before Luke interacting naturally with her son, evoked an inexplicable emotion in Julia. For 8 months since she discovered her pregnancy, she had faced everything alone. Robert had gradually distanced himself, claiming he wasn't ready for fatherhood. His family had treated her like an intruder, and now this man she barely knew showed more consideration and care than anyone in her recent life. "All right," she finally said, giving in, "but only the basics. And I want to know how much it costs so I can reimburse you when I can." Raphael stood up, holding Luke, who was now playing with a button on his shirt. "I accept the first condition, but I refuse the second. Consider it a welcome gift to London. Besides," he hesitated, "they're just a few items that were sitting in a company warehouse. Furniture from an employee housing project that never went ahead." She didn't entirely believe that explanation, but decided not to insist, at least not at that moment. The delivery men finished bringing the items. A small table with 2 chairs, a simple but comfortable sofa, a chest of drawers, a small bookshelf, and a box that, when opened, revealed a beautiful solid wood cot, exquisite in its simplicity. "This cot," Raphael explained, gently stroking the smoothly polished wood, "was the first gift I gave my sister when she had Mary Ann, my niece. She's saving it for her next child, but when she heard about your situation, she insisted you use it as long as you need." Julia felt tears forming in the corners of her eyes. It wasn't just the generosity of the gesture, but the meaning behind it. Sharing something of sentimental value, not just material. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Say you'll use it," Raphael replied simply. "It will look much better with Luke sleeping in it than stored in a warehouse." She nodded, not trusting her own voice at that moment. Luke, still in Raphael's arms, yawned deeply. "Looks like someone is ready to try out the cot," Raphael commented with a soft smile. "Yes, it's getting late for him." After the delivery men left, Raphael helped Julia assemble the cot in the smaller bedroom, which would be Luke's. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally interrupted by the baby's giggles, who watched the adults from his activity mat. When they finished, Raphael held Luke while Julia fetched the sheet and small pillow. Seeing that powerful man, CEO of a large company, so at ease with her son, evoked conflicting feelings in her. "Ready," she said, extending her arms to take Luke. "Bedtime, little man." Raphael handed over the baby, who was already fighting sleep, his eyes heavy. "He's amazing," he commented softly. "You two are." The comment, made with such sincerity, caused a warmth in Julia's chest that she preferred not to analyze at that moment. After putting Luke in the new cot, she returned to the living room, where Raphael was organizing the empty boxes. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, leaning against the wall and watching him. He stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "I know, but I wanted to." "Why?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. "Because," he hesitated, as if weighing each word, "because when you pretended to sleep on my shoulder on that plane, and ended up actually sleeping, it was the most genuine thing that had happened to me in years. And because your son grabbed my finger without judging who I was or what I was worth, and because—" He took a step towards her. "Because I want to be part of this new phase of your life, even if only as a friend who helped at the beginning." Julia felt her heart race. The raw honesty in his words completely disarmed her. Shall we start over?" she suggested, extending her hand. "No pretending this time." Raphael smiled, accepting the gesture. "Raphael Mendelssohn, just Raphael." "Julia Alves," she replied, feeling the warmth of his hand enclose hers. "And the little guy who just fell asleep is Luke." "Nice to meet you, Julia and Luke Alves," Raphael said, not letting go of her hand. Truly. The dawn in Richmond brought a different quality of light from what Julia knew in Brighton. The golden rays entering the apartment windows created geometric patterns on the floor. Still empty of decoration, but no longer so empty of furniture thanks to Raphael. Sitting at the small kitchen table, a cup of coffee in her hands, Julia contemplated the dizzying changes in her life over the past 2 weeks. The solid wood cot had been just the beginning. Without her asking, Raphael had also sent sheets, towels, basic kitchen utensils, and even a high chair for Luke. Each item came with a handwritten note explaining its origin. Some were genuinely from company projects, others belonged to friends who no longer needed them. Some were new but bought at sales. He seemed determined to help her without hurting her pride, always creating a narrative that minimized the cost or effort involved. That night, he appeared with the furniture had changed something between them. The dinner the next day, which Julia had initially viewed as a simple thank you for his help with the apartment, had turned into a night of surprising confidences. Raphael had picked her up, driving himself, not his driver, in a surprisingly modest car for his standards. The choice of restaurant also surprised her, not a luxurious establishment in Mayfair or Knightsbridge, but a small family bistro in her own neighborhood, with a space specially prepared for children. "How did you find this place?" she had asked as they settled at a discreet table at the back of the restaurant, with Luke comfortably installed in a high chair provided by the establishment. "I researched," Raphael had simply replied. "I wanted a place where Luke could be at ease and where you wouldn't feel out of place." That consideration, the genuine concern not only for her, but also for Luke's comfort, had melted Julia's last resistances. The conversation had flowed naturally throughout the evening, drifting from superficial topics to personal revelations that are not usually shared on a first dinner. Raphael had spoken about the pressure of taking over the family business so young, the burden of being responsible for the livelihood of hundreds of families, the constant fear of failure. He confessed that, even after 15 years of success leading the companies, he still felt like an imposter on some days, playing a role he had never chosen for himself. "What would you have chosen?" Julia had asked. "Architecture," he had replied, a different sparkle appearing in his eyes. "I was in my 3rd year of university when my parents passed away. I had plans to work with sustainable projects, integrating constructions into natural landscapes without damaging them." "Do you still draw?" "Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep," he had confessed. "But they're just scribbles now, dreams of a life I didn't live." The vulnerability of that confession had touched Julia deeply. The powerful agribusiness CEO, who appeared in economy magazines and closed multi-million-pound deals, was also a man with abandoned dreams and fears he couldn't share with anyone. For her part, Julia had opened up about her failed marriage to Robert, how he had gradually distanced himself during her pregnancy, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility, how his family, traditional and conservative, had subtly suggested that the pregnancy had been planned by her to trap their son. "The hardest part," she had revealed, her voice choked with contained emotion, "wasn't him leaving but realizing I was completely alone. My parents passed away years ago. My only sister lives abroad. Brighton began to feel like a prison. Every corner reminded me of broken promises." Luke, as if sensing his mother's sadness, had started to get restless. Raphael, without any embarrassment, offered to hold him while she finished her meal. The naturalness with which he interacted with the baby, making him laugh with discreet, funny faces, contrasted drastically with the image she had initially formed of him. At the end of the evening, Raphael had taken her back to the apartment. On the way, he had stopped at an artisanal ice cream shop, insisting they couldn't end the night without trying the best tapioca ice cream in London. Sitting on a park bench, with Luke asleep in Julia's lap, they had shared the sweet treat and a few more confidences under the almost invisible stars of the metropolis. At the apartment door, with Luke sleeping soundly in her arms, she finally asked the question that had been circling in her thoughts. "Why are you doing all this for me?" "The truth." Raphael held her gaze for a long moment before replying. "Because when you slept on my shoulder on that plane, when Luke held my finger without knowing who I was, I felt a connection I hadn't experienced in years. You two see me just as a person, not as an asset or a business opportunity. It's liberating." Now, 2 weeks after that conversation, Julia still replayed his words as she finished her coffee. The apartment was gradually taking shape, becoming a home. Classes at the new school would start on Monday, and the institutional nursery had accepted Luke, allowing her to work peacefully knowing her son would be well cared for. Raphael had become a constant, though respectful, presence in their lives. He never showed up unannounced, always asked if it was a good time, and never crossed the boundaries she set. Sometimes he brought small practical gifts, a mobile for Luke's cot, a regional cookbook when she mentioned missing northeastern food, a pre-loaded transport card when he learned she was still adapting to the city's complex underground system. What impressed Julia most, however, was how genuinely interested he was in her opinions and experiences. One evening, while they were having dinner at her apartment, she had insisted on cooking after so many restaurants, Raphael mentioned an educational support project his company was developing in rural communities. "Actually," he had said hesitantly, "I would really like to hear your perspective on this. As an educator, you would probably see aspects we are overlooking." She was surprised by the sincerity of the request. He genuinely wanted her professional opinion. He wasn't just being polite. They spent hours discussing pedagogical possibilities, adapted to the reality of the countryside, with Julia suggesting approaches that connected the formal curriculum to the traditional knowledge of the communities. Raphael took notes on everything, fascinated, occasionally sharing his own ideas, which she realized were surprisingly aligned with progressive education principles. "I would make a great teacher," she had commented, impressed by his understanding. "I had good examples," he had replied with a soft smile. "My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She always said that education is not just about transmitting knowledge, but about awakening the natural curiosity that exists in every child." That revelation had created yet another connection between them. Julia's mother had also been a teacher, and their educational philosophies were remarkably similar. Now finishing her coffee and looking at the clock, Julia realized she was looking forward to the day ahead. Raphael had mentioned he would bring something special for Luke that morning. "Something that belonged to someone very important to me," he had said mysteriously. As if responding to her thoughts, the doorbell rang. Luke, who was playing on the living room rug, immediately turned his head towards the door, as if recognizing who was arriving. "Coming!" Julia called, quickly running her fingers through her hair in an automatic gesture before opening the door. Raphael stood in the hallway, holding what appeared to be a package wrapped in simple paper, tied with string. None of the ostentation one might expect from someone with his resources. "Good morning," he smiled, his gaze lighting up as he saw her. "Am I interrupting?" "Not at all," Julia replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Luke and I were just enjoying the quiet Saturday morning." Upon entering the living room, Raphael immediately knelt down to greet Luke, who quickly crawled towards him. "Hello, champ. I brought something special for you." The baby cooed excitedly, stretching out his little arms. The connection between the two was something that still surprised Julia. Luke, usually shy with strangers, had accepted Raphael from the very first moment, as if he recognized him on some deeper level that she didn't fully understand. Raphael picked Luke up with the ease of someone with practice, balancing him while handing the package to Julia. "What is this?" she asked, curious about the simple wrapping. "Something that had been kept for a long time," he replied. "Something I would like Luke to have." Intrigued, Julia untied the string and carefully opened the paper. Inside was an old teddy bear, with evident signs of having been much loved, a little worn in the right places, but impeccably clean and cared for. "It was Caroline's, my sister's," Raphael explained, his voice softening as he mentioned the name. "Our father bought it when she was born. It was her first toy." Julia held the teddy bear, touched by the simplicity and meaning of the gift. It wasn't something expensive or ostentatious, as one might expect from a man with Raphael's resources. It was something genuinely valuable, a part of his family's history. "Raphael, I don't know if we can accept something so significant," she murmured, touched. "Please," he insisted gently. "Caroline kept it all these years, but when I told her about Lucas, she suggested it herself. She said toys like this need to be loved by children, not kept in boxes." Lucas, noticing the new object, stretched out from Raphael's arms, trying to reach the teddy bear. Julianne brought the toy closer, and the baby immediately grabbed it, hugging it against his chest with obvious joy. "I think the decision has already been made," Raphael laughed, watching how Lucas had already become attached to the gift. "It seems so," Julianne agreed, feeling a wave of emotion she couldn't quite name. "Thank you. It's a very special gift." Their eyes met for a moment, and Julianne felt something subtly shift in the air between them. It wasn't just gratitude she felt, nor merely friendship she saw in Raphael's gaze. "Would you like some coffee?" she offered, breaking the moment before it became something she wasn't ready for. "I just made some." "I'd love some," he replied, following her to the small kitchen with Lucas still in his arms, the teddy bear firmly clutched by the baby. As she prepared a cup for Raphael, Julianne watched him discreetly. He had sat down in one of the chairs with Lucas on his lap and was talking to the baby in a low voice, showing him how the teddy bear had a nose that made a little sound when squeezed. The naturalness of that scene, a man and a baby sharing a simple moment of discovery, caused a tightening in her chest. "You'd be a great father," she commented without thinking, and immediately felt her face flush with the possible meaning of those words. Raphael looked up, surprised and visibly touched by the comment. "Thank you," he simply replied. "It's something I've always wanted, actually. A family." "Never married?" Julianne asked, realizing that despite all the conversations they had shared, this was a topic they had never directly addressed. "No," he replied, adjusting Lucas more comfortably on his lap. "There were a few relationships, but it's hard to find someone who's interested in the person, not the wealth or status." The honesty in his answer touched her. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a quiet acknowledgement of his reality. "I understand," she said, sitting at the table with her own cup. "It must be hard to trust people's intentions." "It's like living with a filter always on," he confirmed. "Analyzing every gesture, every word, looking for ulterior motives." He paused, looking at Lucas, who was now playing contentedly with the teddy bear. "That's why what happened on the plane was so significant to me. When you slept on my shoulder, it was real. There was no calculation, no hidden agenda. Oh, it was just a genuine moment of human trust." Julianne felt her heart race as she realized how much that simple gesture had meant to him. What for her had been just a moment of exhaustion shared with a stranger, for Raphael had represented a rare connection in a world where authenticity was a luxury he could rarely afford. "Do you know what else impressed me that day?" he continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point as if reliving the memory. "When you woke up, you didn't know who I was. You didn't recognize my name, my company, nothing. You just treated me as any man sitting next to you." "And that was good?" she asked, genuinely curious. "It was liberating," he replied, turning his gaze back to her. "It was like breathing fresh air after years in a confined space." Lucas, as if sensing the intensity of the moment, let out a giggle and extended the teddy bear towards Julianne, wanting to include her in the play. Both smiled, the moment of vulnerability softened by the baby's innocence. "He really liked the gift," Julianne commented, accepting the teddy bear momentarily before Lucas claimed it back. "I'm happy," Raphael smiled. "Caroline will love to hear that. She's eager to meet both of you, by the way." "Your sister wants to meet us?" Julianne asked, surprised. "Of course. I've been talking a lot about you two in the past few weeks." He seemed suddenly embarrassed, as if he had revealed more than he intended. "I mean, she was curious about how we met on the plane and—" "It's okay," Julianne smiled, lightly touching his hand over the table. "I've also been talking about you to Chloe. She thinks you're my first-class Prince Charming." Raphael laughed, the embarrassment dissipating. "First class? I was in business class, actually. I'm not that extravagant." "I'll inform her of the error," Julianne joked, happy to see the tension dissipate. They spent the rest of the morning in easy conversation. Discussing everything from the upcoming lessons Julianne was preparing to the projects Raphael was developing to expand the educational program on the farms. Lucas alternated between playing with his new teddy bear and demanding the adults' attention, creating a dynamic that felt surprisingly natural for three people who had known each other for such a short time. When lunchtime arrived, Raphael suggested they order food, offering to pay. Julianne, however, had other plans. "Actually," she said, getting up and going to the refrigerator, "I thought I'd prepare something special today. I brought ingredients to make hoppin' john and collards, a recipe from my grandmother. It's a typical southern dish that I think you'll like." "Really?" Raphael asked, visibly excited by the idea. "I've never tried authentic homemade southern food." "Then prepare yourself for a culinary experience," she smiled. "But I'll need an assistant. Do you think you can help me while I take care of Lucas?" "At your service, chef," he joked, getting up and symbolically rolling up his sleeves. "I just don't guarantee professional results." What followed was one of the most relaxed afternoons Julianne had experienced in years. Raphael, despite his evident lack of kitchen practice, proved to be an enthusiastic learner, following her instructions with almost comical concentration. Lucas watched everything from his high chair, occasionally receiving small pieces of cheddar cheese to taste. When they finally sat down to eat, with the aroma of hoppin' john and collards filling the small apartment, Julianne felt a strange sense of completeness. It was as if that moment, simple, domestic, unpretentious, represented something that had been absent from her life for a long time. "This is incredible," Raphael praised after the first forkful, genuinely impressed. "Seriously, Julianne, you should open a restaurant." "And abandon 28 curious students? Never," she laughed. "But I'm glad you liked it. It's a family recipe." "The best food always is," he commented, serving himself another portion. "My mother made a mushroom risotto that was practically a family institution. I tried to recreate it a few times, but it never tasted the same." "Some recipes need love, not just ingredients," Julianne observed, surprising herself with her own culinary philosophy that she had never articulated before. "You're right," Raphael agreed, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race again. "The best things in life can't simply be replicated by following formulas." There was something in that look, an unformulated question, a silent invitation hanging between them. Julianne felt a wave of panic mixed with another emotion she didn't want to name. "Raphael," she began, not knowing exactly what she wanted to say. "I know," he interrupted gently. "It's too early. You're still rebuilding your life. I have my own complications. I'm not pushing for anything, Julianne. I just want you to know that being here with both of you makes me happier than I've been in years." The honesty of the declaration completely disarmed her. It wasn't a conventional romantic declaration, but something deeper, the recognition of a connection that went beyond usual categories. "We also like having you around," she admitted finally. "Lucas has never connected like this with anyone before, not even with his father?" Raphael completed gently when she hesitated. Julianne nodded, feeling the old pain resurface briefly. "Roderick never really wanted to be a father," she explained in a low voice. "When I found out about the pregnancy, he was already pulling away. He stayed out of obligation for a few months, but it was clear he considered Lucas and me as obstacles to his freedom." Raphael reached his hand across the table, covering hers in a gesture of comfort. "He lost the chance to know two extraordinary people," he said with conviction. "The loss was his, not yours." Julianne felt tears forming, not of sadness, but of relief at finally hearing words she had unknowingly needed to hear for a long time. Lucas, sensing the emotional shift, began to make noises to get attention. Raphael immediately turned to him, making a funny face that made the baby burst into laughter, breaking the tension of the moment. "See?" Julianne smiled, discreetly wiping away a tear. "You two have a special connection." "We do, don't we, champ?" Raphael replied, picking Lucas up from the high chair. The baby immediately clung to him, pulling his tie with fascination. "I guess he likes my dubious fashion sense." Julianne laughed, grateful for the lightness he brought back to the moment. It was a quality she admired more and more in Raphael, his ability to navigate between emotional depth and everyday joy without apparent effort. The rest of the afternoon passed in a bubble of domesticity that felt surprisingly natural. Raphael helped wash the dishes, insisting it was fair since she had cooked. Afterwards, they sat on the small sofa while Lucas played on the rug between them, occasionally using them for support as he tried to stand on wobbly legs. As the sun began to set, casting golden and orange hues through the window, Raphael finally announced that he needed to leave. He had a video conference with international partners that night, something he couldn't postpone. At the door, with Lucas in Julianne's arms, there was a moment of hesitation that seemed charged with possibilities. "Thank you for today," Raphael said, his voice softer than usual. "It was perfect." "Thank you for the teddy bear," she replied, indicating the toy Lucas still held firmly. "It means a lot that you shared something so special with us." Raphael took a step forward, closing the distance between them. For a moment, Julianne thought he was going to kiss her, and surprisingly, realized she wouldn't pull away if he tried. Instead, he gently touched Lucas's face, who smiled at him, and then in an almost reverent gesture, brushed his fingers against her cheek. "See you soon," he murmured, and then he was gone. Julianne stood by the door for a long moment, feeling the warmth of his touch linger on her skin, while Lucas babbled contentedly in her arms, still hugging the teddy bear that already seemed a part of him. Something was changing, she realized. Something that had begun with an unusual request on a plane and was now imperceptibly transforming into something she wasn't sure she was ready to name. Something that both scared and attracted her in equal measure. The first week of classes had passed in a whirlwind for Julianne, adapting to the new school, her colleagues, the routine of dropping off and picking up Lucas from institutional daycare. All of it consumed her energy. Yet, even amidst the tiredness, she was surprised by the growing sense of belonging in Atlanta. Her apartment in Inman Park was gradually transforming into a home. The simple furniture Raphael had brought had been complemented with small personal touches. A plant on the window, framed photographs, drawings from her new students on the refrigerator. That Friday, returning from school with Lucas, Julianne found a small package outside her door. Inside, a book on sustainable architecture with a note, "For when you want to better understand my nocturnal scribbles, Raphael." Interspersed between the pages, she found small hand-drawn sketches, architectural project outlines that she recognized as the nocturnal scribbles Raphael had mentioned. They were impressive, revealing a talent the corporate world had never known. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Chloe inviting her for Sunday lunch. After hanging up, she saw a message from Raphael. "I'm in Charlotte for a meeting, but I'll be back tomorrow. Can I stop by to see you two on Sunday? I have a proposal to discuss." A proposal? The ambiguity of the word made her heart race momentarily. "Sunday we'll be at my cousin's house for lunch," she replied. "But you could stop by here afterwards if you like. Lucas is always excited about your visits." "And you?" came the almost immediate reply. "Are you also excited about my visits?" The boldness of the question surprised her. Normally, Raphael was careful not to pressure or imply anything beyond friendship. "Yes," she finally typed, opting for honesty. "I am too." Sunday dawned sunny, one of those perfect late winter days in Atlanta. Lunch at Chloe's house was warm and joyful. Anna, her 12-year-old daughter, practically monopolized Lucas, determined to teach him new words and games. As Julianne prepared to leave, Chloe pulled her into a quiet corner of the kitchen. "So, how are things with your executive prince?" Julianne rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "Raphael is just a friend, Chloe." "A friend who provided an apartment, furniture, and visits you regularly. Of course, completely platonic," Chloe teased. "It's complicated," Julianne admitted. "He's amazing with Lucas, attentive to me, and yes, there is something between us. But I'm scared, Chloe. I've barely gotten out of a disastrous relationship. I'm still settling in here, and Raphael lives in a completely different world from mine." "Different worlds can meet," Chloe replied. "Don't let the fear of the past prevent you from seeing the possibilities of the present." Turning the corner of her building, Julianne spotted Raphael leaning against his car, wearing jeans and a simple shirt, looking more like an ordinary resident than the powerful businessman he was. In the apartment, after settling Lucas in his crib, Julianne found Raphael looking out the window, contemplating the neighborhood view. "You mentioned a proposal," she said. "I confess I was curious. Actually, there are two proposals," he explained, indicating the sofa for them to sit. "One professional and one personal." "Let's start with the professional one," she suggested. Raphael nodded. "Remember the educational project on the farms? We're creating a pilot program on 3 properties, with schools integrated into daycares, using methodologies adapted to rural realities. We'd like you to be the pedagogical consultant for the project," he continued. "It would be a job parallel to your role at the school, adequately compensated. You would develop guidelines, train local educators, and make periodic visits to the properties." The proposal took Julianne by surprise. It was an incredible opportunity to use her background to positively impact rural communities. I don't know what to say," she murmured, genuinely impacted by the trust he placed in her professional abilities. "I'm not offering this as a favor," Raphael replied. "I've seen how you talk about education, the passion and knowledge you have. It's exactly what the project needs. I'll need to think about the logistical details, especially with Lucas. But yes, I'm interested." His smile lit up. "Great. We can discuss all the practical arrangements, including how to accommodate Lucas during visits to the properties." There was a significant pause before Raphael continued. "As for the personal proposal," he began, his voice softer, "since that day on the plane when you pretended to sleep on my shoulder and actually fell asleep, something changed in me. It was as if a space I didn't even know existed began to fill." His eyes met hers with intensity. "In the past few weeks, getting to know you and Lucas, I realized I found something that money, power, and status never gave me. A genuine connection." Julianne felt tears in her eyes, moved by the sincerity she saw. "I know it's early," he continued. "I know you're rebuilding your life, that Lucas is your priority, that you might still have fears based on past experiences. I'm not asking for promises or formal commitments." He extended his hand, gently touching hers. "I'm just asking for a chance to explore what's growing between us, at a pace that's comfortable for you, respecting your boundaries and Lucas's." Julianne thought of all the times Raphael had shown respect for her independence, affection for Lucas, consideration for her circumstances. "I'm scared," she finally admitted. "Not of you, but of what I feel when I'm with you. It's intense, Raphael, and frightening." "I'm scared too," he confessed. "Scared of not being the man you and Lucas deserve. Scared that my world might become a burden for you. But I realize there's something even scarier. The possibility of letting what we can build together slip away. When you asked me to pretend to sleep on your shoulder," Julianne said, "I never imagined that moment would completely change the course of my life." "For the better, I hope," he replied. "For the better," she confirmed. "You brought possibilities that I had given up imagining, not just for me, but for Lucas too." The sound of a cry came from the bedroom, indicating that Lucas had woken up. Raphael smiled. "Looks like he wants to join this conversation too." Julianne returned with Lucas, who, upon seeing Raphael, immediately stretched out his arms towards him. Raphael picked him up, settling him on his lap. The baby snuggled in, resting his head on his chest. "I think we have his approval," Raphael joked, but there was a sparkle in his eyes that revealed how much that gesture meant. "So, is it a yes?" he asked, the vulnerability in his voice contrasting with the image of the powerful businessman. "It's a let's try," Julianne replied, moving closer to caress Lucas's hair. "At our pace, respecting our processes. It's all I can ask for," he smiled, leaning in to touch his forehead to hers in an intimate gesture. Lucas let out a giggle and extended the teddy bear to Julianne, as if wanting to include her in that circle of affection. "Did you know that in Southern tradition, sharing a personal item with someone is a symbol of trust and connection?" Julianne commented. "My grandmother used to say that when someone offers you something of emotional value, they're not just giving an object, but inviting you to be part of their story." "I like that tradition," Raphael said, "because that's exactly what I want, to be part of your story, and to invite you to be part of mine." In that moment, Julianne felt a certainty she hadn't experienced in a long time. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew that unusual request on a plane had been just the beginning of something genuine they were now writing together. "Let's do this," she said, sealing the moment with simple words that carried the weight of a transformative decision. Raphael smiled, extending his arm to include her in an embrace that now enveloped all three, a complete circle, a new beginning, a family in the making. Through the window, the late afternoon breeze carried the sounds of the city that had initially seemed so intimidating, but which now revealed itself as the perfect backdrop for this new journey. New York City, with all its grandeur and challenges, became the backdrop for a story that had begun with an unusual request at 10,000 meters altitude, and which now, firmly anchored in the ground of shared reality, promised to reach new horizons. And as the golden light of dusk bathed the small apartment, illuminating the three faces united in that embrace, a silent certainty hung in the air. Sometimes the truest endings begin when we allow ourselves to be genuine, when we abandon pretenses and dive into the authenticity of the present moment. Sometimes pretending to sleep on a stranger's shoulder can be the awakening to the most sincere of love stories.